The perfect life is the most seductive lie a woman can tell herself. For 15 years, my lie was a masterpiece, a flawless portrait of affluence and happiness hung in the gilded frame of our life in Oak Haven Estates. I was the curator of this beautiful fiction. And then one sweltering July afternoon, my son called my bluff with a single devastating touch. Before you recoil, before you cast me in the role you've already written for me in your mind, I need you to understand the geography of my silence. I need you to walk through the grand echoing foyer of my house, to feel the chill that the central air could never quite banish, and to see the woman I had allowed myself to become. So subscribe to this channel and listen closely. The phantom limb of a life unlived aches in more homes than just mine, and its pain is a language you might understand better than you think. Our home was the crown jewel of our cul-de-sac, a modern architectural marvel of glass and cedar overlooking the still dark waters of Mirror Lake. We were the embodiment of the Oak Haven dream. Richard, my husband, a titan in the world of investment banking, a man who spoke in numbers and market projections. Helen, the effortlessly elegant wife chairperson of charity committees, whose serene smile was as much a part of the decor as the minimalist art on the walls. And our son, Jacob, 19, and navigating a gap year, a handsome, quiet boy who was the living proof of our success. But the glass walls of our house didn't just let the light in. They reflected my own invisibility back at me day after soul-crushing day. Richard wasn't cruel. Cruelty requires passion. Richard was simply absent. He was a phantom who materialized at breakfast, his gaze already fixed on the stock tickers glowing on his tablet, and dematerialized after a late dinner, his mind still crunching data from a world I couldn't enter. His love wasn't measured in affection, but in provision. The flawless quartz countertops, the German luxury sedan in the driveway, the platinum credit card, these were his love letters. I had become the chief operating officer of his domestic life, a high-functioning ghost who ensured his world ran smoothly, a creature so familiar she was no longer seen. The loneliness was a fine, invisible dust that had settled on every surface of my life, a coating of gray on the vibrant colors I once used to be. The day the fault line cracked open was a Thursday, trapped in the humid grip of an unforgiving heat wave. The air was thick, tasting of pine and hot asphalt, and the ceaseless drone of cicadas was the only soundtrack to the suffocating stillness. Richard, as usual, had been summoned to New York for an unavoidable market emergency. His apology over the phone was brief and efficient, devoid of any real warmth. "Hold down the fort, Helen. I'll make it up to you." An old hollow promise. Jacob and I were left to drift in the cool, silent expanse of the house. He had been quiet all summer, possessed by a teenage melancholy I couldn't penetrate. He spent hours in his room with his guitar playing soft, intricate melodies that sounded like questions without answers. To escape the feeling of being specimens under glass, I suggested we take the paddleboards out on the lake. The water was like a sheet of dark, polished obsidian mirroring the cloudless, bleached-out sky. For an hour we were just a mother and her son, our paddles dipping into the water in a comfortable rhythm. We talked about nothing and everything, a band he'd discovered, the funny way our neighbor's dog chased squirrels, his vague plans to travel in the fall. In those moments suspended on the still surface of the lake, I felt a flicker of my former self, a woman who could laugh without it feeling like a performance. We paddled back to our private dock, the sun beating down with a ferocious intensity. I lay on my stomach on a thick towel, the heat soaking into my bones a heavy lethargic warmth. I could feel the sun's rays concentrating on my back, a prickling heat that signaled the start of a burn. "Jake," I said, my voice lazy with the heat, "can you get my back? The sunscreen is in the bag." A simple request. utterly mundane, the kind of thing I'd asked 1,000 times before. But the silence that followed was different. It wasn't the immediate, easy compliance of the boy he used to be. It was a waited pause, a beat of hesitation that hung in the thick, humid air, altering the very atmosphere around us. Then I felt the gentle rocking of the dock as he moved behind me. The first sensation was the cool, slick lotion on my skin. The second was a jolt, a low-voltage current that shot directly from the point of contact to the base of my spine. His hands. They weren't the hands of my little boy anymore. They were the hands of a young man, broad, steady, and achingly gentle. The act was one of care, but my mind, a vessel hollowed out by years of emotional famine, couldn't process it that way. As his fingers smoothed the cream over my skin, my entire world narrowed to the path his hands were tracing. This was undivided attention. This was deliberate, focused care. This was a physical affirmation of my existence, a warmth I hadn't realized I was dying for. With each slow circular motion, a terrifying and beautiful flower of awareness began to bloom in the pit of my stomach. He was learning the shape of me, the curve of my waist, the line of my shoulders with a focused intensity that felt like a form of worship. In that moment, I knew with a dreadful, soul-shaking clarity that Jacob was with no ill intent occupying the space Richard had abandoned years ago. His simple filial kindness was pouring into the cracks of my marriage, and I was absorbing it like parched earth absorbs rain. How did I let the drought last this long? How had I become so dehydrated that this simple touch felt like a flood? The drone of the cicadas seemed to grow louder, a high-pitched siren warning of a danger I was willingly ignoring. A deep, silent current was pulling me away from the safe shore of my identity as mother, out into a dark, unnamed body of water. The silence between us was no longer comfortable. It was electric, thick with unspoken thoughts, and the birth of dangerous new feelings. The sun's heat was no longer just warm. It was scorching a fire that had been smoldering for a decade now, fanned into life by the most forbidden of breezes. When we walked back to the house, its cool, conditioned air felt like a slap in the face, a return to a reality I no longer recognized. That evening, I moved through the motions of preparing a meal neither of us was hungry for. I found myself watching Jacob as he sat at the kitchen island scrolling through his phone. I watched the way the light caught the line of his jaw, the quiet competence in his hands, and I felt a wave of shame so profound it was nauseating. What had I become? This empty vessel so desperate for validation that I would drink it from a poisoned well. I turned away, gripping the edge of the counter, my knuckles white, and then I felt his presence behind me. He hadn't made a sound, but I knew he was there. "Mom?" he asked, his voice soft. "Are you okay?" I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, a small, tight gesture of denial. I felt his hand on my arm, a light, questioning touch. It was not the touch from the dock. This was a touch of concern of a son for his mother. But it was too late. My body couldn't tell the difference anymore. Every point of contact was now charged with the memory of that afternoon. I flinched, pulling away as if I'd been burned. The look in his eyes, a flash of hurt followed by a deep, searching confusion, was like a knife in my gut. He saw it. He saw the panic, the guilt, the terrifying new awareness that was shimmering in the air between us. We were two people standing on opposite sides of a chasm that had opened up in the middle of our kitchen floor, a chasm we had both in our own ways helped create. And the look we shared was not one of family, but of co-conspirators bound by a secret that was still taking shape. The next few days were an exercise in excruciating tension. Richard called twice, his voice distant, crackling with bad reception and corporate concerns. He was extending his trip through the weekend. The news landed not with disappointment, but with a terrifying mix of relief and dread. It left Jacob and me alone, marooned together in our silent glass-walled prison, the unspoken thing from the dock growing in the space between us. We avoided each other, moving through the large house like ghosts. I'd hear the soft chords of his guitar from his room, and the sound felt like an accusation. I'd catch him watching me as I watered the plants on the veranda, his gaze intense and questioning, and I'd quickly turn away, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air was thick with potential, with words that couldn't be spoken and feelings that shouldn't exist. On Saturday evening, the heat wave finally broke. The sky, which had been a relentless pale blue for days, turned a bruised greenish gray. The wind picked up, rattling the huge panes of glass, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. A summer storm was rolling in off the lake, and it felt like the perfect, pathetic fallacy, an external manifestation of the tempest brewing inside me. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging the house into a deep, disorienting twilight. The hum of the air conditioning died, and a thick, humid silence descended, punctuated only by the rising howl of the wind and the drumming of rain against the roof. "I'll find the candles," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "They're in the utility closet." Jacob's voice came from the darkness of the living room. "I'll get them." He returned moments later with an armful of thick pillar candles and a lighter. We lit them and placed them around the cavernous living room, their small flickering flames casting long dancing shadows on the walls. The house, usually so modern and sterile, suddenly felt ancient and intimate, like a secret cave. We sat on opposite ends of the long sofa, the storm raging outside, the candlelight making our familiar surroundings strange and new. "Heard from Dad," Jacob asked, breaking the silence. His tone was neutral, but I heard the subtext. "This morning," I said, focusing on the flame of a nearby candle. "He's staying through the weekend. A deal is closing." Jacob let out a short, bitter laugh. It was a sound I'd never heard him make before. "There's always a deal." The words hung in the air, a simple statement of fact that held the weight of a 15-year indictment. He had seen it all. He had grown up in the shadow of his father's ambition, a quiet observer of my slow erasure. "He does it for us, Jacob," I said, the defense sounding weak and hollow, even to my own ears. "Does he asked, and this time he looked directly at me, his eyes dark and serious in the flickering light. "Or does he do it for himself? Do you even know who you are without him?" "Mom." The question struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was the question I had been too terrified to ask myself for over a decade. Who was I? I was Richard's wife. I was Jacob's mother. I was the woman who ran the perfect house and chaired the charity balls. These were my functions, my roles. But the person, the woman named Helen, she had been whittled down to almost nothing. A ghost haunting her own life. Tears I didn't know I had in me began to well up hot and shameful. "I don't know." I whispered, the admission a crack in the dam of my composure. He saw my tears, and his expression softened from accusation to a deep, aching sympathy. He moved from his end of the sofa, closing the distance between us. He sat beside me so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I see you," he said, his voice a low, intense murmur. "I see you when he doesn't." He reached out, not for my arm, but for my face, his fingers gently brushing away a tear from my cheek. His touch was electric, 1,000 times more potent than it had been on the dock. It was a conscious, deliberate act of comfort that was inextricably tangled with the forbidden awareness that now lived between us. My mind was screaming. A cacophony of warnings, of shame, of terror. "He is your son. This is the ultimate transgression." But my body, my starved and broken body, leaned into his touch, craving its warmth, its validation, its reality. The storm outside crescendoed a deafening clap of thunder, shaking the house to its foundations. And in that moment, as the world outside raged, he closed the final inch between us. His lips met mine. It was not a kiss of passion in the traditional sense. It was a kiss of profound shared loneliness. It was a kiss of desperation, of two people reaching for an anchor in a storm. It was gentle and questioning and utterly devastatingly wrong. And I kissed him back. In that single catastrophic moment, every role I had ever played, wife, mother, pillar of the community, shattered into a million pieces. The lie I had so carefully constructed was consumed by a fire of truth, a truth that revealed I was nothing more than a woman so starved for connection she would seek it in the arms of her own child. It was the death of the ghost I had been and the birth of a monster. But as the kiss ended and we pulled apart, breathing heavily in the candlelit darkness for the first time in 15 years, I felt real. I was no longer an idea. I was a body, a woman. And I was without question damned. The greatest tragedy isn't the sin you commit in a moment of weakness. It's the slow, quiet death you endure for years that makes the sin possible. It's the danger of mistaking a role for an identity, of pouring so much of yourself into a facade that when the facade cracks, you find there's nothing left inside. My transgression wasn't born of a monstrous desire, but of a monstrous emptiness. And it's a terrifying testament to the fact that when a soul is left to starve, it will eventually inevitably eat itself alive. If this story has resonated with you, if it has forced you to look at the quiet spaces in your own life, I ask you to support this channel. Like, share, and subscribe. Your engagement is what allows us to keep telling these difficult stories, to hold a candle up to the dark, complex corners of the human heart.